Silence can be louder than any statement, especially when wielded by a monarch. In the saga of Meghan Markle and the British royal family, few things have spoken as loudly as the palace's refusal, again and again, to comment. But that silence is not passive. It's deliberate, it's tactical, and it may be shaping Meghan's royal future more forcefully than any royal pronouncement ever could. The power of the crown has never been in its words, but in its pauses. Each silence is a chess move disguised as stillness. Why would a monarchy, accustomed to ceremony and symbolism, choose silence as its weapon? What does it demand of Meghan, and what veiled leverage does it give the crown? In the next chapters, we'll probe how Queen Elizabeth cultivated this silence as power, how it continues to cast a shadow over Meghan's path, and what that might mean for what lies ahead. The royal architecture of non-response. Silence in monarchy is not absence, it is an instrument. Over her 7 decades, Queen Elizabeth did more than cultivate dignity. She rehearsed restraint. Every time she said nothing, the nation leaned in closer. That attention itself became her influence. The Queen as master calibrator. From the earliest years of her reign, Queen Elizabeth's communications bore a studied consistency. Clear, calm, deliberate. She spoke rarely, and when she did, the words were weighty. She was a study in understatement and in what was left unsaid. Her visual cues were equally potent. Her choice of dress, the arrangement of brooches, the fact of public presence at symbolic venues, these nonverbal signals were interpreted by courtiers, press, and public alike. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her wardrobe could headline the front page before a single word left her lips. For instance, the so-called never complain, never explain approach was not just a maxim, but a royal posture, refusing to engage too directly with criticism, thereby preserving mystery and dignity. But this maxim wasn't always rigid. In moments of crisis, Elizabeth would break silence, but only on her own terms. Moments when silence turned into statement. After Diana's death, 1997. In the days following her death, Buckingham Palace was criticized for the Queen's initial silence. The monarchy seemed aloof when grieving subjects gathered at royal palaces in large numbers. The public backlash forced Elizabeth to deliver a tribute, but that moment also taught the institution how dangerous miscalculated silence could be. The Queen learned that silence without empathy is void. Silence with timing is power. During the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, Elizabeth broke her usual verbal reserve with a televised broadcast, only her 5th national speech in her reign. It was a carefully crafted appeal to unity, stability, and hope. But its rarity magnified its impact. Royal crises and internal disputes. Over decades, when scandals, marital strife, or institutional criticism struck, Elizabeth often allowed subordinates to address the media. When she intervened personally, it was with brevity and gravitas. That pattern itself sent a message. She did not need to explain, but she could when necessary. Her silence became a kind of reserve power, a tension that courts, staff, and media understood implicitly. Power was not in what she said, but in how long she could wait before saying it. The world blinked first. Silence as a controlled vacuum. One of the paradoxes of strategic silence is that it forces others to speak, often prematurely or excessively. In court communication theory, leaving a vacuum invites speculation and story-making. But in Elizabeth's calculi, that vacuum was often safer than hastily speaking. It allowed the institution to time its response or allow controversies to fade, rather than overreact. In the monarchy's communications manual, unspoken but real, silence is a filter. Only the strongest, most essential messages are allowed to emerge publicly. The Queen's genius wasn't in avoiding storms. It was in building an umbrella so large that thunder eventually tired itself out. Meghan's arrival in the precursor to silence. To see how this royal silence impacts Meghan's future, we must first map the terrain she entered. A palace built for deference, symbolic order, and guarded voice. A mismatch of expectations. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's marriage in 2018 was greeted with both curiosity and contestation. She arrived already media savvy, with advocacy credentials. From the start, she embodied a tension between change and tradition. Her activism, her openness on certain issues, and her desire to maintain her identity clashed subtly with a royal institution built on restraint. Even early in their marriage, rumors surfaced of senior staff unease, alleged demands for personal freedoms, critiques of palace protocols, and tensions over who controlled the public narrative. Meghan walked into a house where silence was the language and tried to speak in full sentences. These were not trivial frictions. They marked Meghan as someone who might push against conventions, someone who would make speech a tool, not just role play. Megxit as prelude to silence. In 2020, Meghan and Harry announced they would step back from senior royal duties. The move exploded across the media. The palace, led by the Queen, convened a Sandringham summit to negotiate the fallout. The Queen's statement afterwards struck a middle ground. Recognition of their desire to change, but affirmation that certain roles and institutions must remain fixed. That summit was one of the few times Elizabeth cut in more explicitly. But after that, the pattern of silence around Meghan reasserted itself. The Queen didn't need to close the door. She simply stopped holding it open. Escalating narratives muted replies. When Meghan and Harry gave their 2021 Oprah interview, they leveled serious allegations: institutional racism, lack of mental health support, refusal of help. The palace went silent for nearly 2 days before issuing a statement on the Queen's behalf, acknowledging concerns, expressing sadness, and saying some recollections may vary. That hedged phrasing, recollections may vary, itself became a masterstroke of ambiguity. It neither fully admitted nor denied, preserving institutional space. In 5 words, the Queen redefined public relations: empathy on one side, plausible deniability on the other. After that, the palace rarely commented on Meghan's independent ventures, her media projects, philanthropic work, or public pronouncements. Instead, silence became the default reply. For the royal machine, ignoring was not avoidance. It was dominance disguised as dignity. Silence in motion, post-Elizabeth patterns. With Elizabeth's death in 2022, the crown lost its central human voice. Yet the strategies she ingrained have not evaporated. They survive in palace culture, institutional memory, and strategic restraint. Now those silences fall on the Meghan narrative. When the palace breaks silence, and when it doesn't. Harry's lost security appeal, 2025. In May 2025, Prince Harry lost a court appeal seeking reinstatement of state-funded security when he visits the UK. The palace issued a rare firm statement. All of these issues have been examined repeatedly and meticulously by the courts, with the same conclusion reached on each occasion. That response was procedural, not emotional, and explicitly did not mention Meghan. Other controversies, while tabloids circulate rumors, from tension over Meghan's brand or streaming projects to speculation about royal family disputes, the palace stays silent. Occasionally, courtiers issue statements or clarifications, but the institution itself remains mute. Selective historical silence. Observers note that, in general, royal scandals, extramarital rumors, courtiers' critiques, political criticisms, the palace tends to act through intermediaries, not through high-profile statements. The default posture is non-engagement. Thus, Meghan's claims, moves, and conflicts often exist in a vacuum of palace comment, which in itself is a message. When the palace doesn't speak, it isn't being polite. It's marking territory without leaving footprints. What silence telegraphs in modern media. In today's hyper-connected media ecosystem, silence is rarer and thus more conspicuous. When the crown declines to respond, speech-hungry reporters and social media fill the void. Yet that is precisely the point. Silence becomes a framing device. Ambiguity becomes control. Without palace affirmation or denial, every media narrative competes, and the crown sustains authority by refusing to pin itself down. In a world drowning in opinions, the one who stays quiet becomes the only adult in the room. Exhaustion as deterrent. Many commentators eventually tire of speculating in the dark. Silence forces fatigue, the louder voices lose stamina. Institution as above personal drama. By refusing to engage, the monarchy retains its dignity, presenting itself as an institution above interpersonal spats. Meghan's confrontations, in contrast, are cast as individual crises. Silence doesn't just end arguments, it changes their altitude. The palace stays on the mountain while others sink into the valley of noise. Delay is cooling off. Often controversies wane before the palace ever feels compelled to step in. Long fade-outs of stories serve the crown more reliably than flurries of denial. To put it plainly, silence shifts power toward the institution. Every unanswered headline becomes a lesson that the monarchy's loudest defense is the absence of one. Hypotheses. What Elizabeth's silence could be saying to Meghan. Let's shift from diagnosis to interpretation. What might the strategic silence mean for Meghan, for royal actors, and for the larger public? A warning cloaked in non-reaction. The refusal to respond can be a signal. Media conflicts and court fights won't coerce a reaction. It telegraphs that individual grievances won't make the institution bend. It's the royal equivalent of a poker face that never folds, forcing every opponent to overplay their hand, a test of endurance. Silence places the burden on Meghan to sustain momentum. If she cannot keep the narrative vivid, it risks fading into the institutional background. Silence is patience weaponized, preserving boundary around legitimacy. By not officially recognizing or inviting Meghan's claims, the crown maintains control over what is royal and what is external. It denies tacit endorsement. Recognition, not rejection, is the real currency of monarchy, and silence is the way it withholds payment, a trap of indecision. Conversely, prolonged silence can suggest ambivalence. It may make Meghan feel unsupported or marginal. If no path exists toward reconciliation, silence may harden exclusion. Silence cuts both ways. It can heal wounds or prove the patient was never meant to survive. A late entry card. Silence also keeps options open. The crown can always intervene later, but chooses to intervene only when it benefits the institution, not the individual. In effect, the silence is a conditional shield. Meghan is free to speak, but the institution will speak only when and how it sees fit. It's the monarchy's ultimate superpower. Infinite patience disguised as indifference. Meghan's roads ahead, navigating the quiet kingdom. If silence is the institutional default, how does Meghan chart a course? Her choices may depend on choosing how to speak in the spaces where silence reigns. Path A, reconciliation by subtle diplomacy. In this route, Meghan and Harry would initiate quiet outreach, perhaps through intermediaries, to regain trust or goodwill. She might avoid overt confrontation, preferring small signals, charitable alignment, low-key royal appearances, or behind-the-scenes collaboration. Over time, the palace may reciprocate with implicit reintegration, invitations without headlines, roles without fanfare. Her public brand would shift subtly towards synergy with Commonwealth, cross-cultural initiatives, or institutions where royal legitimacy matters. This gradual, low-drama approach could reduce friction and allow the palace to reassert control on its timetable. In royal politics, reconciliation isn't announced. It's noticed months later, after it's already happened. Path B, institutional outsider with influence. Meghan may fully accept or double down on her outsider role. She builds her influence through media, public speech, philanthropy, and global networks, independent of the monarchy. She frames her narrative not as rejected royal, but as alternative royalty, a moral, symbolic counterpoint to the crown. The palace never formally embraces or rebukes her. Silence becomes a boundary. This path carries risk. Without institutional legitimacy, her voice may fracture or be marginalized in royal discourse. The louder she becomes, the more regal the palace looks by comparison, silence casting itself as sophistication. Path C, tactical confrontation and repositioning. If Meghan chooses to press harder, she releases controversial interviews, legal claims, or projects that force palace reaction. The crown may choose to respond or double remain silent, but Meghan frames the conflict as structural, not personal. The challenge: the palace rarely escalates personal battles. Meghan may find herself in a public war where the adversary refuses to engage. You can't win a duel if the other side never draws their sword. Each path carries trade-offs between influence, legitimacy, autonomy, and vulnerability. Public perception in the silent age. How the public reads silence is fluid. It depends on narrative architecture and media framing. Silence can breed speculation and conspiracy, but it also insulates the institution from missteps. Meghan's critiques, lack of palace reaction, refusal to defend, can be framed either as victimhood or dignified dignity. Polls around Meghan's favorability are mixed. Her critiques of the monarchy resonate in some quarters, but alienate in others. Without palace engagement, she must contend with every new frame. In effect, silence is a double-edged sword. It spares the institution immediate exposure, but leaves Meghan to fight for narrative space. When history is written, noise fades, but silence prints clean on the page. The last voice of unsaid words. In royal politics, what is never said often speaks most loudly. Queen Elizabeth's legacy of strategic silence was not passive or inert. It was disciplined, institutional, and deeply communicative. And even after her passing, that silence continues to govern Meghan Markle's uncertain position. Meghan now treads a field where silence is the default arbiter. Her choices to reconcile quietly, confront boldly, or build influence independently will be shaped less by palace statements than by palace absences. The Queen may be gone, but her silence is still on the throne. As viewers, we must ask, in a world obsessed with declarations and call-outs, is silence a weakness or the crown's sharpest tool? And for Meghan, is that silence a barrier, a challenge, or an invitation to rewrite her own script? Maybe the truest royal voice isn't the one that shouts, but the one that endures without ever needing to.